Early psalm study was what is sometimes called a personal historical approach to the Psalms. Who wrote the psalm? What was their situation in life? Psalm 6 is written by someone who was suffering illness. You know, Job suffered illness, so let's read Psalm 6 in terms of Job. It was a very subjective method of study, and some scholars came along, one in particular, who was wanting to seek a more objective approach. His name was Herman Gunkel. It is very hard to overestimate the influence that Gunkel had on biblical studies. It's interesting, even in later years, individuals who disagree with what Gunkel said often used Gunkel's method that he invented to disagree with him. At that point, I think you've won the argument when people are doing that. But he was curious about the relationship between the Psalms and worship, and he began to notice what I would call family resemblances between the Psalms. And he called these individual family resemblances, families, Gattung, or forms, that there are certain forms or types as you would go through the book of Psalms. It kind of like we can think about genres of music. He could think about genres of Psalms as well. He had some major types. His 5 major types were the hymns, community laments, individual Psalms of thanksgiving, and royal Psalms. So those are the 5 major types that you have there. Obviously, hymns are celebrating. Communal and individual laments are crying out to God in a time of difficulty or despair. Individual Psalms of thanksgiving are just exactly that, an individual thanking God for their situation. And a royal Psalm is something that is going to involve the kingship of David, some sort of Messiah mention or God's anointed mention. But there are other types as well, those minor types of Gunkel, some pilgrimage Psalms and wisdom songs and prophetic Psalms and Torah Psalms. But all of those have their own particular quality, in the same way that you can listen to the radio and know, well, this is a country song. Gunkel could look at a psalm type and know what kind of psalm it was. The most popular type of psalm might surprise you. The most popular type is an individual lament. By some numbers, over a third of the Psalter has psalms in them that have qualities of lament, individual lament. So if you're feeling a little down and you're looking to cheer yourself up and you decide to go to the Bible and pick a psalm at random, there's a better than 1 in 3 chance you're going to find an individual who's crying out to God in a time of difficulty and complaining to God. What's interesting is if you add the communal laments into the individual laments, by some numbers people say half of the psalms can be considered having lament characteristics in there that can be very depressing if you're not prepared for it. The laments themselves are pretty remarkable in their form, I think, pretty remarkable in their form. We're going to talk more about the laments in detail when we get to some of them. But just to give you an example of the kind of qualities, if I asked you to identify what does a country song have in it, you might point to the accent that the singer is using, some of the instruments, maybe a steel guitar. You might start pointing out some the old joke about it's got to have mama, it's got to have beer, it's got to have a truck, it's got to have, your dog has to die, your wife has to leave. What all these elements you normally think of in a country song. Well, there are elements like that to these individual types as well. For Gunkel, a lament psalm had 5 different qualifications. First of all, there was an address or an invocation. You have a moment where you have a first person address to God, O Lord. Then you have the complaint. Whatever the complaint, whatever the problem is, you describe that to God. I'm sick, my enemies are after me, I'm innocent, the wicked are condemning me, whatever it is that is the problem the psalmist has. Then you move to the petition. This is where you ask God to do something about the complaint. Save me, deliver me, hurt them, whatever it is the psalmist is looking for, that would fall in the petition. What is fascinating about the lament psalms is it never ends there. You never have just an, oh Lord, here's my problem, do something about it. You always have, with 1 or 2 exceptions, we're going to talk about the exception when we get to it, you always have an affirmation of trust. You always have this moment in a lament psalm where the singer says, but as for me, nevertheless, God has heard me, but I trust in the Lord, but I know God will deliver me. It's often the turning point of the psalm where God is celebrated as the one who has heard this cry and is going to deliver the psalmist. And then often the lament psalm finish with a word of doxology, where God is celebrated for who God is. A classic lament psalm would be something like Psalm 6 that fits sort of all of the qualities of your basic lament psalm. So those are some of the features of the psalm types. One of the questions that I would want you to ask is, what role do these psalm types play in interpretation? Now that you know they're there, now that you know there's individual psalm types, what's the role of that? I mean, different psalm types might mean different positions in life, or as Gunkel would say, different Sitz im Leben. Some of the psalms might be more cultic, some might be more individual, some might be more communal. So what does that mean when you're reading it? What it meant versus now what it means. So something to be aware of as we're looking through the Psalms.